Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to FDU's Alumni Webinar Series, sponsored by the FDU Alumni Association and Office of Alumni Relations. We hope everybody's doing well and staying healthy, and we certainly appreciate you sharing your evening with us. I do want to take a moment before we get started to let everyone know that we're recording this evening's webinar so that we can share it with those who could not be with us tonight. We have muted all participants, but would like to remind everybody to keep your videos turned off so that we can focus on our speakers, and to keep yourselves muted. Dr. Caldwell will be fielding questions this evening through the chat feature. So if you have any questions now or throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat feature in Zoom. You can find that on the bottom bar in your browser. And he'll answer questions throughout. So at this time, I would like to welcome Dr. Karen Lewis, the Associate Vice President of University Advancement.
Thanks, Jennifer, and welcome everyone this evening. This is the third webinar in this series of webinars presented by the Alumni Association and the Office of Alumni Relations and Development. And we hope everyone's doing well and washing their hands. And we'd like to also thank Coach Greg Horinda, who presented last week. He did a great job. And tonight we're pleased to have Dr. Dale Caldwell and two special guests with us tonight. And let me introduce Dr. Caldwell, and he will do an introduction of his guests for us as well. Dr. Caldwell is professor and the Executive Director of the Rothman Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship in the Silberman College of Business at Fairleigh Dickinson University. He's leading the Institute's efforts to support and promote research, family, veteran, and student entrepreneurship. In addition, Dr. Caldwell is the host of TV show Business World. His research focuses on entrepreneurship and public policy. Dr. Caldwell is also the CEO of Strategic Influence, LLC. The entrepreneurial organization uses the intelligent influence framework that he created to provide strategy, operations, coaching, business development, and leadership training to clients. We're excited that he's here with us this evening, along with his two special guests, to talk about the small business stimulus, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we're also excited for next week. We have Professor Dr. Peter Woolley, who will be speaking about polling fools, how and why we do it. But we're excited to have you join us tonight, our special guests, as well as Dr. Dale Caldwell. So let's get on with tonight's topic, the small business stimulus, the good, the bad, and ugly. Dale?
Thank you.
Toss it over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that wonderful introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. I am going to begin, say a little bit about the Rothman Institute that a lot of people don't know about. Then I have the honor of talking to Glenn Tucker, who's the managing partner of Greenberg, Dauber, Epstein, and Tucker, and Linda Harvey, a partner with the same firm. They have tremendous expertise dealing with this issue, the small business stimulus in the economy. So let me just begin by introducing you to the Rothman Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Our mission is to research, promote, and support entrepreneurship with a special focus on family and veteran businesses. Our programs, we've had this Family Business Alliance where we really provide a community for family businesses for more than 30 years. Our Veterans Launching Ventures program where we help veterans who have business ideas develop business plans. We've had that for over 10 years. We have a small business series for 5 years, and we've had student programs since our inception 30 years ago to really help students who have an interest in being entrepreneurs to become successful during school and even after school. What are we doing now for the stimulus? One of the things that we've been doing every Friday for the last 3 weeks is having a weekly Zoom call from 12 to 1. On the call, we have experts like Glenn and Linda who are actually going to be on the call on Friday. So if we don't get all your questions today, we're going to have them again on Friday. We're going to make sure that all of the alum have the link to this conference call where we're fielding questions. As many of you know, many small businesses have major cash flow issues, are truly struggling in this economy. So it's really important that that their voice is heard, which is why we've teamed with Peter Woolley and Krista Jenkins for the small business poll. So we're doing a poll of businesses of 100 or fewer employees to really get their voice. One of the things that you'll see in my presentation is how small business drives the economy, yet so often we think it's big business that really is doing that. And I want to show you some graphs. So I want to start with a graph of the major stock markets. It's a few weeks old and the market has rebounded a little bit, but you see the Shanghai index, the Hang Seng index from Hong Kong, the Nikkei index from Japan, Dow Jones, and the FTSE. You see how they dropped after the WHO declaration. And so that's important. As I said, there's been some rebound in the markets, but I just want you to see that. And then contrast that with what's gone on over time. Those of us who were working in 2008, 2009, remember that dip in the economy, which was really horrendous and really impacted a lot of us out there. You see the dip that we have, which is about the same. But the interesting thing about the two different drops in the market is this. So if you look at the new unemployment claims, look at 2009. The record for all-time unemployment claims in the United States was 750,000 individuals. You start looking here at 2020, where you saw in the stock market the dip was about the same. It's over the record is over 6.2 million. It was 3.6 million, I think, 2 weeks ago, and over 6 million the last 2 weeks. So what's different? Why is it that the unemployment was so low even during the crisis of 2008, 2009, 2010? Well, when you start to look at the numbers, and actually here are the numbers, so 3,307,000, 6,867,000 the record, 6,606,000. So you see that level of unemployment being so high. And so often, and the reason I want to start here is that we have been lulled to believe that this is a big business, the United States of America is a big business economy, but it really isn't. So if you really look at the large versus the small businesses, 69.7% of all the businesses in the United States have fewer than 100 employees. 19.9% have 100 to 499, and more than 500 is just 10%. So you can really see how that breakdown shakes out. One of the challenges is if you look at this CARES Act, you see that big corporations got 500 billion, individuals 560 billion, but small businesses 377 billion. And so that's why what's happening, even though we're talking about this 2 trillion CARES Act, which was it's bipartisan, so this is not either party, is that really isn't going to be enough. And so we're here to talk about the future. We've heard that some people thought, well, this 2 trillion is more than enough. We'll get back to a good economy, but it really doesn't look like that's working. And so finally, I want you to really see how important these small businesses have, that they have truly big impact. So there are 28.8 million small businesses nationwide. They represent 66% of all the net new jobs in the United States. They account for 99.7% of all US businesses. And the money spent at a local business stays in the community 3.5 times more than other businesses. They generate 54% of all US sales, and they employ 56.8 million Americans. So when the very necessary mandates to keep people home and keep people out of stores and keep stores closed, that is really hurting the economy, which is why we thought tonight's program is so very important. So I have the opportunity to introduce someone who's become a good friend, H. Glenn Tucker, who's the managing partner, as I mentioned, of Greenberg, Dauber, Epstein, and Tucker. Glenn has specialized in corporate, commercial, and banking transactions since 1980. But since this crisis, he's really developed a real focus on the financial and legal issues small businesses are facing and will likely face in the future. it's not just about today, it's really about tomorrow. So joining Glenn is really Linda Harvey, who's a partner in the same firm. Linda has been with the firm since 1984 and has specialized in alternative dispute resolution, commercial litigation, employment litigation, and we'll be talking today about some of the human resource issues related to this. So Glenn's going to talk about the financial issues. Linda's going to talk about some of the human resource issues. And so with that, Glenn and Linda, I want to welcome you to our program tonight. Thanks for agreeing to come on. Glenn, I'll turn it over to you if you wanted to say a few things.
Thank you very much, Dr. Caldwell. Thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you to Fairleigh Dickinson University Alumni Association for giving us this opportunity tonight. We're honored to be here tonight to help your audience in any way we can answering questions. We're truly in challenging and unprecedented times. And before we get into any of these challenges and these different problems we're going to talk about, we first, on behalf of the firm, want to wish everybody good health to you, all your families, all your loved ones. And we're all going to work together and we're going to get through this. The title, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, we really want to focus more on the good tonight. There have been some problems with the stimulus, but we all need to focus on the good in order to get us through this situation that we all find ourselves in, but we'll get through it. Tonight, we're going to talk about the stimulus. We'll talk about the federal programs. We'll talk about New Jersey and the EDA programs. But we also want to make sure that we're expanding our base to talk even a little bit further about other programs that are related to these direct stimulus programs, not only under the CARES Act, but also under perhaps tax provisions or even other related areas that are all necessary to help boost the economy and boost jobs and boost employment and get small and middle market companies going again. We'll also talk about some larger company efforts as well, because I think that does have some bearing on the future and what we're going to see down the road as well. I also just want to emphasize that for tonight's purposes, we're also free to talk about some other impacts and threads that connect the stimulus to other aspects of the economy and to businesses, closely held and small businesses, and many, many family businesses, including things just like business interruption insurance, data breach, what happens under leases, what happens under contracts. So we can really take questions tonight, and I want the audience to know that if we can go just a little bit, just beyond some of the detailed loan questions, we'd be happy to do so. And again, our goal tonight is really to help you and answer your questions. And as Dr. Caldwell said, maybe shed some light on the future based on what we're seeing today in this evolving situation. With that, I'll turn it over to my partner, Linda Harvey.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Caldwell, for inviting us. Maybe I'd like to just give a little brief background into some of the things that I'm familiar with in this very, very unique crisis. Employment lawyers like me, because I do an awful lot of workplace and employment law, have had to suddenly understand and learn the ramifications of the COVID-19 crisis, the effect of the disease on the workplace, what options employers have, what options employees have. It's affected by a whole mix of different statutes, executive orders, both state and federal. So yes, while we're primarily here to talk about the CARES Act and the remedies that are available under the CARES Act, you have to also keep in mind what problems businesses face and peculiar questions. So for instance, we've had a number of executive orders here in New Jersey, and there are a number of executive orders in New York, but they're written in a very different way and they have different ramifications, even though New York, New Jersey, and the Northeast states are cooperating together. So I'm here to answer any questions if anyone has any about what can happen, what the rules are in the workplace, what happens if one of your employees gets sick, when can people come back, what are the rules? For instance, OSHA has come out with rules recently on what the expectations are in the workplace for making sure individuals don't get sick and there is a safe workplace. So I'm happy to answer or address any of those questions.
Well, wonderful. And I'm encouraging people to, I have enough questions to carry us through. If people don't have questions, I have a couple, but Glenn, let me ask you, for those that don't know, what is the CARES Act? Let's kind of break it down. Not everybody really understands what's going on. So
Okay.
what's going on?
Yeah, the CARES Act is the name given to the federal legislation, which is the umbrella legislation, which authorized these trillions of dollars to be unleashed in a variety of areas. The ones we're most familiar with, all to stimulate the economy. The ones we're most familiar with are the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP or PPL, which is being given to enable companies to remain in business and to obtain loans which convert to grants. That's really the one that we're most familiar with, and it is the primary one and extremely popular. There's also an emergency loan program as well. And in addition, under the CARES Act, other provisions were brought into play to stimulate the economy with regard to tax provisions that assisted folks in many different ways, both at the company level and at the individual level. So when we think of the CARES Act, we're really thinking about the major federal program, which is having some continuing and bolstering by the Federal Reserve, which has recently authorized a Main Street lending program to provide additional dollars. The programs under the CARES Act are so popular. There is some evidence that folks that are queued up in line to obtain these loans may find out that the funding may run out. Congress has to give additional dollars, and under the Federal Reserve's Main Street lending program, which went to larger companies, there has been very substantial funding by the Fed coming down the pipeline for much larger organizations.
So let me follow. So the PPP, what is the PPP? What are, people talk about that?
Yeah,
Is that
in a nutshell.
the CARES Act or?
Okay, in a nutshell, it's basically a program which is going through banks. You put your application in through a bank, that goes on to the SBA. Much of this is funded through the Small Business Administration. And what you do is you basically calculate, and this is a very, very brief summary, but you calculate looking back during your last year, and you look basically at what you've been paying in wages for the last year, then you do a multiple of that, and then that yields a formula, which is the amount of the loan that you get. When your paperwork goes in, and then you eventually, it goes to your bank and then the SBA, when it's approved, you are funded, and then you have a loan. Then you have 8 weeks to repay that loan, and 75% of those monies have to be used toward wages. And then it basically becomes a grant. The balance of the 25% can be used for rent and utilities for your business, and then it becomes a grant. You don't have to pay interest on it, and you don't have to repay it. It truly is a grant.
So let me go, Linda, let me turn to you. So, the independent contractors, the single shingle people, the people that have their own business could never apply for unemployment before. Now they can apply for unemployment? Is that true?
No, what they can do though, is they can apply through the CARES Act for, it's essentially unemployment. So what they can get is 2.5 times their salary, average out over a course of 12 months. So they can get that. It's not unemployment per se that you get directly from the state, but you get it this way. And it's essentially equivalent to it. I also wanted to mention there's another program, another part of the program that might be interesting to folks. And that is if a particular person, if an employee becomes sick, they're entitled to 80 hours of extended extended medical leave. And that particular amount that is paid by the employer is dollar for dollar deducted from the payroll tax. So in other words, it's more or less like as a credit that's given to the employer. So that is government funded, okay? So if you're taking care of an individual that has coronavirus, or if you yourself get sick, 80 hours. Another part of that same program is if you have to take care of a child, you can't work because you have a child home from school, you get 2/3 pay for 12 weeks. So those are, and that again, that is basically funded by the government, but the employer has to put the money out, but then it's refunded through the payroll tax deductions and credits.
Okay, well that's important. That's a change. Glenn, we have a question. Can you apply for both PPP and SBA emergency loan?
You can, but you do have to be careful.
Mhm.
There are some really highly technical restrictions on your situation if you're in multiple programs and how the money is used. But generally speaking, you can be involved with both and obtain money from both. But I just urge caution because the answer is extremely technical on the interrelationships of these different loan programs.
Right. And Linda, going back to what you said, again, I'm reading some of the questions, and I appreciate people sending these questions. Now, if I'm an independent proprietor and I don't have any income, then I really, there's no, I don't get that money.
Okay, no, actually, here's how it works out. You don't get those 80 hours and all that because you're an independent proprietor.
Right.
But what you can do is, and actually my son has done this because he's a 1099 guy and he has his own business. You look back in the past, some people are saying it's 2019, some folks say it's the past 12 months, tomato, tomato, right? But what you do is you look at that, how much you paid, what your income was, less expenses, and what's the bottom line? That's what you paid yourself. And that's what you average out as your wages for that period of time. And you would be entitled to basically 2.5 months of that. So if let's say you earned $50,000 in 2019, you would divide that by 12, multiply by 2.5, and that's what your entitlement would be.
Okay. Now some of these cases, one of the things that I want to give our number at the Rothman Institute, which is 973-443-8577. If we don't answer your question, because some of these are very, very specific, but some of them are ones that I think other people would be interested in. And so someone said the husband became sick and they started working for 2 months. Can they apply for unemployment? They took over the business. The husband has Parkinson's. They took over the business. They started working for a few months. Can they apply?
Okay. If the person was an employee, then they can apply for unemployment.
Right.
Okay. But if they weren't an employee, then no.
Then no. Okay, good.
Yeah. Unemployment is still not available to a 1099 person.
Right. Good.
Dr. Caldwell, can I just interject on something that Linda said?
Yeah.
When she was talking about the look back period and she mentioned tomato, tomato, that distinction, that subtlety of the pronunciation of the word gives rise to a thought for me, which is that these rules on the look back were not clearly written statute or regulation about what that period is. And that period, whether it was 2019 or you look at the 3 months of this year plus the 9 months of last year, became very critical. And there's been much back and forth written about it. But I want to use it as an example that the statute was hastily written. It was rushed. The regulations have been rushed. The interim regulations and any final regulations that we're seeing coming down the pike have a lot of gray. And there's a lot of room for interpretation in many areas. So I urge all your listeners caution. Things are changing in real time. We are keeping up with these things day and night as they change and the gray gets filled in. But there's so many nuanced answers to so many questions about these programs due to the haste with which they've been put through, which is a good thing to help the economy quickly. But I urge everybody caution to be very careful, seek your advisors, talk to folks who you trust, bankers, lawyers, accountants, other family members who you trust, consultants, and make sure you're really seeking good advice because it's so important to make sure you get your paperwork through quickly. You don't want to have your paperwork returned because you did something in error.
As an example of what Glenn was just talking about, initially, if the loan was not forgiven because you didn't meet certain qualifications, for instance, 75% has to be spent for payroll to pay to individuals. The loan rate was 6%, then it went to 4%, then it went to 1%. So it just keeps changing. Who knows how it's really going to end up? Right now it's 1%. Another qualification was previously, the rules were that if any company that had owners outside of the United States that amounted to more than 20% of ownership, could not apply for one of these PPE loan grants. That changed, and now it's as long as the entity is properly created and in the United States and is a United States company, then there can be an application. So things are changing. Those are just two examples. And what was true last week is not necessarily true this week.
Well, and that's part of the reason, folks, why we wanted two expert lawyers on, because there's so much chaos. There's so many things going on. I mean, we work at FDU Rothman. We work with hundreds of businesses, and we're hearing different stories. Some of the businesses are, they apply for the PPP, they don't hear back from the loans, or the website is down. Yet others who are working with maybe local banks, have a relationship, are actually getting through the process. Glenn, you want to talk about that?
I'd be happy to comment on that, because what happened in the very, very early stages on the launch of the PPL program is that there was really massive confusion, because some of the banks had the technology to deal with the flow of the information coming in. They could handle the volume. Other banks couldn't. Also, certain banks were not fully committed into the program yet. So you had confusion amongst the public about whether their bank was actually going to accept them or not. Then certain banks set up criteria as to who the applicant would be. For instance, it might have to be a loan customer or a credit card customer. So as that has gotten sorted out and the banks are getting more up to speed, the issue really is the pipeline. And the pipeline is flooded both at the bank level, because the bank has been given the job by the Small Business Administration of approving the paperwork. Once it's approved, it goes into another pipeline up in the SBA, and then the SBA has reviewers. So there's really several stages, and we're finding different banks are having different turnaround times, and it's very inconsistent. But the money is flowing, and we are finding our clients are starting to receive their monies under the various programs federally, as well as the state EDA programs, although those were sold out so quickly. They virtually were sold out almost in a matter of minutes.
So is it, let me ask you, because we actually had, not a debate, but we had at one of our Friday calls, there was, one state official said that it's discriminatory to not service people even if they don't have an account with the bank. Others say banks have that discretion, which is true.
Well, I can't give a definite answer, because I think in this chaos, I don't think there's a definite answer, and the federal government, as a criteria for what they were going to do in terms of banks accepting the customers, I don't think they made that designation. So it's a fairness question, not so much a legal question. It's more a question of equity. But I agree, this issue has led to so much frustration with our clients who went to their banks and were told they didn't have the right kind of relationship with the bank. But it's so important, if you have a nice relationship with your banker, you should work with your banker closely, get the paperwork done properly, get it done exactly right, so you don't get bounced out of queue and have everything come back to you for a second go round.
Excellent. Linda, going back to you, and I hope the audience, I love going back and forth. We want to kind of cover, these are exciting lawyers. Now, these are lawyers, we're having a good time. We want to.
There's no such thing as an exciting lawyer.
We're not that exciting.
These are exciting lawyers. So the COVID-19, so what if an employee of your business tests positive for that? What do you do for the business? What goes on?
Okay. There's certain things that are requirements that you must do, and there's certain things that you should do to save your business. Everyone should understand that OSHA has stepped in, and if there's an unsafe situation, the employer is responsible for correcting the unsafe situation. Specifically in the COVID situation, that means making sure that employee leaves immediately. I've told clients of mine, say, oh, I just learned that so-and-so tested positive. Walk them out the door immediately. Why are they there? But you have to take another step. It's not just that person. You must then just talk with that person. And there are guidelines set forth, by the way, by the New Jersey Department of Health that are very helpful on this topic. You need to interview the employee after the employee leaves, of course, by telephone. and ask who did that employee interact with in the past 14 days. Because just because they're symptomatic now or they've tested positive now, they could have been contagious for the prior 14 days. You need to isolate those individuals and have those individuals go home. I've had I guess the unfortunate task of having to guide many small businesses through this process in the past month. Those that listened and followed the program, they've been okay. They've, it's a disruption. You might have to take 6 or 7 people out of the business because of the interaction of that one individual test positive. But in the end, it's helpful to the business. Those that didn't listen, several of them had to shut their businesses down because this disease travels so quickly. And when you do the math exponentially, we've all heard the stories, but it really is true. One person will infect 3 people. Those 3 people will infect another 9 people. And that's how it works. Then when they need to return, this is an interesting one because now people are getting better. So there is not specific guidance in New Jersey as to what happens after a person recovers. However, a lot of folks are looking to Ohio that says you can return someone to your workplace 3 days after they've fully recovered and they have no symptoms. It is also recommended by a number of different government entities that the employer have the person's temperature taken before they come in. Now, don't use those little thermometers that go in someo's mouth, but there's other great thermometers that you can just swipe their foreheads or whatever, and some of them you can just put a light or put a screen at them and it works. And don't let anyone into your workplace that has a fever.
Interesting. Okay. The Glenn, we haven't talked about the economic injury disaster loan, the EIDL. You want to say a little bit about that?
Sure, I'll mention that's a little bit different than the PPL loan or grant. This is truly a loan of up to $2 million. It's primarily for working capital, and it is a very low interest, favorable repayment terms, and it is a well-funded program. But it is very important that if you're choosing between the PPL and this economic disaster loan, that you do take some care to look at the various uses of the proceeds of these loans, because sometimes that interrelationship can be very important, and making sure you're understanding it. And again, the stress here is that it's a loan, it must be repaid, whereas the PPL is really a grant. If you use it properly, 75% for employment wages, 25% say rent and utilities and operating costs, that converts to a grant. It isn't a loan. It is only a loan if you don't use it properly over the 8 weeks after you receive it.
And who's overseeing it, Glenn? Who's overseeing? Who's the watchdog to make sure that you're using it the right way?
The technical watchdog is the SBA.
Okay.
And the SBA will be monitoring, and along those lines of monitoring, probably be in conjunction also. I think the banks will play a role due to the fact that they were the spigot and the pipeline for passage of paper and money. I think it's also important that all of the listeners, if they're taking down these loans or grants, be very careful to segregate the money, make sure it's very properly papered as to its uses, so that when the time comes for audit or for any of these issues of the loan forgiveness and these other items to prove, whether it is SBA or IRS or whatever the federal government agency is, make sure that you have really terrific paperwork and controls over your use of the money.
Excellent. Linda, now we have a question. Would an employee who has continuous contact with a first responder be considered a risk to an office environment?
Not necessarily, no. I actually had this situation with a particular employer, with a particular company I represent, and they actually had a first responder working at the company. So what their decision was to let the first responder stay home and continue to pay this first responder and recognize that that person was doing so much good work otherwise. Because they were a little afraid to have them in there. But there isn't necessarily a risk because presumably the first responder has is wearing a mask, is wearing protective gear with protective covering, etc.
Okay. Now, Glenn, we've talked about federal programs. I know New Jersey EDA, came out with a program last week or the week before, and we're overwhelmed. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that was really a great disappointment to so many applicants because the programs were terrific. There was originally a small business emergency grant program, the original one. It sold out very quickly. The second one just followed, which just opened up Monday morning, the Small Business Emergency Fund. It also ran out very quickly.
But Glenn, let me stop you there. But when you say run out quickly, let's give the magnitude that in 70 minutes, they had 2,000 grants. I understand in 70 minutes, about 15,000, actually, 30,000 applied.
Something on that order.
Yeah.
And the sad part was that the amount of funding just wasn't sufficient to meet the demand. And New Jersey has asked for private donations to further fund the small business grant program. And they're asking for minimum donations of 100,000 to help fund it, which is really sad because there's so many folks in New Jersey who need this state aid. And in addition, which will be of interest to your entrepreneurs, there's also an entrepreneurship guarantee program where up to 80% of loans from banks are guaranteed by the NJEDA. And my understanding is that this program, which has funding, is also going to run out, and that sadly will affect many entrepreneurs who need the money. There are specific requirements for that program, but many New Jersey entrepreneurial startups would meet it, and unfortunately, the money is just not there in the state coffers at this moment.
So this is, let me give you another question. This is real life because we're dealing with these things with companies all the time. So a retail, let's see if I can pull that question up again. A retail business that is, you're not going to get, it's going to take more than 8 weeks to get back. They get money that covers 8 weeks. What do they do then? And it just seems, and one of the reasons that I wanted to show those slides up front is to show the magnitude of small businesses to our economy, and that you can't, you can't, and just to see the big business got so much money, it's going to take more stimulus, probably double the amount of stimulus to help these businesses back. So Glenn, you want to talk, because you get to see some of the future or anticipate some of the litigation that's going to go on.
Yeah, and I'm hearing this more and more, and we unfortunately are dealing with that exact scenario, that the businesses are so directly impacted. Retail, those businesses that are not operating, that have this overhead, and unfortunately this money is not going to get out fast enough to everyone to enable them to make those ends meet in a timely fashion. And maybe I'll use this as a segue to the fact that the thing that we're finding in our business, I'm outside counsel to small and middle market companies in all types of industries, manufacturing, distribution, retail, service, many family owned. The sad part about all this is there's such an interconnectedness of all of these things that we're talking about. That stimulus money to help those employees and those families, and the ramifications of that. The ramifications for the business owner who needs to make his rent payment, who can't make it. The impact and the thread to the landlord, the thread to the landlord's bank. And all of these interconnectedness problems are all arising out of this clogged stimulus problem, and they're rippling across our economy. We, as lawyers down the road, are going to see these problems with this excess supply and demand, problems under contracts. People can't meet them. They're breaching contracts, and complicating it further for us, and Linda can comment on this from a labor standpoint. Basically, the court system is closed. So we have the legal system and the economic system are just kind of be creaking along. And when it's over, a futuristic look at what it's going to be down the road, we just don't know how this is all going to break.
There is a moratorium on evictions for residential properties, but there is no moratorium on evictions for commercial properties. So theoretically, a landlord could come in and inject a small business. However, as a practical matter, the courts are, quote, I say they're closed, but they're still open because you can still file complaints. They're still doing some sort of conferences and whatnot, but there are no hearings. There are no there are no juries. So as a practical matter, there will be some sort of delay with respect to landlords having, getting rid of their commercial tenants. There will be, so there will be, that's something good, I guess, for struggling businesses. They'll have a little bit more time to catch up. But eventually it will catch up with them. What I would recommend is, if they're having trouble, is to go to their landlord, discuss it, be open, negotiate, see what you can do. Look, the landlord doesn't really want to lose the small business either. They don't want to have a glut of open spaces. So I would say now is the time to negotiate, and Glenn has been doing that and knows a lot about negotiating with landlords.
And Dr. Caldwell, the other situation that we're facing is that it's necessary that the legislature in New Jersey, and the legislature has been trying to do this on a bipartisan basis, to step in to help. And they've done a lot of terrific things, including the bill that Linda just mentioned. But also just mention one other area which is affecting all businesses, is business interruption insurance. Because the policies were written with an exclusion, most policies written with an exclusion for virus, and there's going to be litigation. Litigation has broken out in New Jersey already on this issue of having the insurance carriers cover for business interruption in light of this huge dynamic problem, this terrible crisis we're in. And the legislature, the assembly's already proposed a bill to force insurance carriers to cover business interruption insurance for smaller businesses. That's working its way through the legislature, but this is happening in multiple states across the country. My prediction is it will become a national issue as well.
So for those that don't know much about this business interruption insurance, so any business, what else does it cover besides, what kinds of things does it cover?
Yeah, it's basically set up so that if your business is suffering from damage, and if your business closes and you have serious economic damage, usually worded to be physical damage, and that's the problem because it's key to physical damage, you measure what your losses are, and there's a calculation for that, and then the insurance company will step in. You've paid a premium for it as part of your policy of insurance, and then you are paid to cover some of those losses that you've incurred. But after SARS, many of the insurance companies worked with state legislatures, New Jersey included, and then included amendments in almost all of our policies that anything like virus is not going to be a reason for coverage.
Right.
So it's only through the contract of insurance won't cover you. But there is hope now that for small businesses, there will be some hope that the legislature will act and help New Jersey businesses in this regard.
Right. Linda, if you could talk about, so that $600 supplement. So you have, this is the first time, explain what that is for those who don't know, and who's eligible for that.
Okay.
For
That is for unemployment.
Right.
And it is a subsidy that's being provided by the federal government. The money will trickle down eventually to the states. So normally the benefit under unemployment is about $635 a week. And this is an additional $600. And they've also extended the time frame for unemployment. So this is actually, for some employees, it makes them whole. Not for all employees, but for some employees, it makes them whole. And it's basically almost doubles the unemployment.
And anybody who gets unemployment is eligible for that?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right, Glenn, so this is the question, and that many of our members are frustrated because, the government shut us down. The government told us not to open. The government said, and this is not conservative or liberal, this is the government really forced us, but they didn't force everybody to open and close. And I know you can't sue, or maybe you can sue the government, but what do you advise businesses who are in an industry that was just shut down? Retail industry is just shut down, or some retail is, other retail is open. I mean, what do they do? What do they do? And I know so many people are so frustrated You know, it's my whole fit, and we do a lot of work with family businesses. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the family business, if that's the family business, they're all out of work. The whole family, all of the breadwinners. What do you do? What do you advise clients to do?
Yeah, we're handling this frustration on a regular daily basis across the board with our clients that have been closed. We're also facing it with clients that are open, but their businesses are ailing for all the reasons of the dislocation, of not being able to obtain goods, no cash flow, problems even with third parties who will not deal with them anymore, problems that they're having just in their business, let alone the employee morale problems and the stress on the employees and the people who work for them. But unfortunately, there's no magic bullet here. We have a health crisis. It's led to the greatest economic crisis of our lifetime. And the government, and again, not being political, but we were just not prepared for what we needed to do fast enough to save those businesses that felt the weight of those orders to close. But those orders were necessary to enable the economy down the road to come back. I won't get into the politics of the start date or when are we coming back. But unfortunately, this is the position in this great uncertainty that we find ourselves in. But there's no one magic bullet. With us, we advise each one of our clients based on their businesses, their financial condition, their family system, and other values of the family, other issues within the family, and their employee base, and their banks, and their relationships with others. For us, it's a really singular analysis, and we have to look at each client differently on what steps we recommend. And we haven't mentioned yet that within the CARES Act, there was even amendments to the bankruptcy provisions. And I'm sorry to mention bankruptcy tonight, but I think it's necessary that I do so because the bankruptcy litigation that is going to develop down the road, Chapter 11 proceedings where companies are protected by Chapter 11 to resuscitate, I believe will become just basically, we don't know when the dam will break, but if companies that are shut down that can't make it, that can't get the money fast enough, don't have outside funding or family funding adequately capitalized, unfortunately, bankruptcies are going to be looming, and these will largely be Chapter 11s initially. They could be Chapter 7 liquidation, but I think that's another area that we're going to see down the road a bit.
Yeah.
So Dale, you mentioned before that, about, oh, what can you do? Can you sue the government? And I just want to comment on that because most lawyers don't know this, but as a practical matter, you really can't sue the government. There are immunities to protect both the state and the federal government and the individuals employed there. And there are certain exceptions to those immunities, but there are very few. Right. So to count on suing the government, I wouldn't even think about that. That was not something that would be available. But I think one of the things that people could do is reach out to their own congressmen and congresswomen. For instance, Mikey Sherrill's in your district, I think, the FDU district. So to reach out to the Congress people, because what we need is a second wave of aid. And if the focus is on the retail establishments, I mean, they're the ones who are hurting, the brick and mortar stores, the restaurants, the ones who are told, you can't do this, we're just gonna shut you down. At least from New Jersey's perspective, the ones who are not hurting as much, I mean, yeah, everyone's hurting. I shouldn't say they're not, but manufacturing can still manufacture. Banks are still open. It doesn't matter what kind of business you're in, whether you're essential or not. If you're a manufacturer, you can stay in business. So these companies may be challenged. They've got problems like Glenn mentioned. They may not have a market right now, but they at least haven't been unqualifiedly shut down by the government. So I think what we need to, if everyone reaches out to their Congress people, that's where some aid would be really needed.
Yeah, and let me reinforce that because so many of and this is a challenge, and again, it's not political, it's the reality that big business have margins so they can afford to hire lobbyists, and even unions have margins so they can afford, but small businesses are living day to day, and they just don't have time to do that. And so most of the small business people that I know don't even know who their politician, their assembly person is, their state senator. certainly not their congressperson. But for those who are small business, now's the time to be active, to really let them know how important you are. This is for the first, and I've been kind of yelling at my TV screen for years to say, this is a small business economy. America is a small business economy. And so we're finally starting to see that. I wish more leaders had gone through, and I'm sure there are people in our audience, to have made payroll. The whole concept of if people, it's a whole different world when you have your own business. I've had my own business, and you have to make payroll. You have to pay other people. You could be a $30 million business and not sleep at night. So people don't understand how hard it is and how close those margins are. And so someone was talking about restaurants. So even if restaurants got all the subsidies that they needed to get through this, people aren't going to go because they're scared of getting sick again. So there's a whole psychological piece to this where people aren't going to go to restaurants, and there's nothing you can do really to litigate that or other things. But that's part of why this is so important, to be a voice. Glenn, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I think litigation is not going to be the answer to solve these problems. I'm going to agree with you and Linda that the additional funding necessary behind these EDA programs, we need to get our state government to continue to fund these wonderful programs. They can keep many businesses functioning, getting them through to the point of viability when we do turn the lights on. As Governor Murphy said, one room at a time, but we're going to get the economy going again. With the federal government, if the Democrats and Republicans can come together and work on a bipartisan basis, they will provide additional funding. And the Federal Reserve, I believe, is prepared to provide additional funding even to the middle-sized company and the larger company, as well as the small company, as evidenced by these new programs they're starting to roll out. And I just wish that we had the infrastructure in place to more speedily get these funds into the hands of those that needed it so desperately.
So Linda, another question that I have: if someone is not sick, but they're working for you, but they have to be home to take care of someone who has COVID-19, what do you do as an employer then? What can you do?
Okay, that employee has an entitlement, and that entitlement is 80 hours of paid leave to take care of a family member at home who has COVID-19. And by the way, they don't have to have a test. They just have to have the symptoms, because there just are not enough tests to test everyone. So as long as the person has the symptoms, that's what the government is accepting. Now, that employer gets a dollar for dollar credit for that. So that will be funded by the government. Look, I'm a little cynical sometimes, so I'm not exactly sure when that money will come through, but when you do your payroll taxes, you're going to be able to get a credit for that. And I assume that if you're using ADP or Paychecks, they're going to be able to handle that for you. So that individual is entitled to 80 hours of paid leave for taking care of a family member who is sick with COVID.
And I really didn't know that actually is worth the cost of this call, because if you're a business, I have a lot of business owners who do that, who want their employees to take care of family members. I mean, family businesses love their employees, and so they didn't realize that they actually can get that reimbursed. That's really
absolutely dollar for dollar,
because that can be, and even if you don't have your business, let businesses know, because that's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. The employee, if the employee himself gets sick, he gets the 80 hours, or someone taking care of someone with COVID gets the 80 hours. That's powerful. And so Glenn, this is something that the future, and I'd like you both, we only have a few minutes. So one of the things that Glenn and I had talked about, and I put up this concept of suspended financial animation. One of the challenges is, it's very hard to stop some businesses from making revenue and still require them to pay their expenses, and not others. That you almost have to kind of stop everything and say, for a month or 2 months, no bills, and then make people whole who are really struggling. I don't know, what are you're both, are you hearing, what are you hearing out there? And I know you're close to both folks on both sides of the legislature.
Yeah, I think I'll answer it first from a from a legal standpoint of negotiating, the way, and I'll just really bring forth what Linda had mentioned before about negotiation. This suspended animation state that we're in, it is affecting everyone. It's affecting vertical, horizontal relationships, contracts, leases, employees, banks. So everybody is affected. And we are finding that if the relationship piece of the negotiation is critical, not so much pulling out a clause of an agreement and then making a threat, but rather working with people, and the enlightened person who has a relationship with a business partner is going to say, we're going to give you some room, and we're getting room, and therefore we're going to make an accommodation here. I believe that many cases are going to resolve that way. Others are not going to resolve that way, and there's going to be a harsh result. But to the extent that that can be done in a manner which is negotiated, again, we have the very unique situation that no one's running to court now because the courts are just too sluggish. So litigation as a route, mediation, arbitration, still working, but again, very time consuming, very expensive, and it's not a tool that people are going to use in this environment of suspended animation. And again, back to the notion of where the politics of this work, we need politics to work. We need bipartisan support for these bills, and we need the funding of the infrastructure to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to get the economy oiled again, up and running, and getting enough businesses and employers up and functioning, getting everybody back to work and getting the economy functioning again. I don't know when that's going to be, but we need to keep our eye on that and try to move toward that goal as quickly as we can.
I would encourage everyone to try to come up with creative solutions. I am finding that in business relationships, folks are open to something creative. As long as you're showing good faith, you're trying to meet the needs of your creditor, at the same time you want to keep your business going. Be creative, be open-minded. This is a whole new world. So, you know, put yourself in the shoes of your business vendor, your business partner, your business creditor, your business relationship, and say, okay, if I was standing in their shoes, what would I do? What would I agree to? Be creative. I don't think there's any rules right now.
So Linda, one other thing, and so I have a few really good questions here. One, the 80 hours apply to all size businesses, regardless, or do you have to have more than 50 employees? That 80 hours of coverage?
There is a limitation, and
Well,
good
I'll
question.
have them email me.
Good question.
So,
Yeah, I will get you the answer. There is a limitation. Yeah.
So I'm sending, so please email us at rothman@fdu.edu if your questions aren't answered, and we'll get you, we'll get you some answers.
I might be able to get the answer in a second for you.
That Charles says is that the changes to the tax code, driving behavior will be very important. So if you put meals and entertainment deduction back into it, so the 3 martini lunch may come back. Is that, what do you think, Glenn? The 3 martini, for those who are too young to remember,
that's true. There may be some of these more radical changes in the tax law, which are really radical policy changes to help people have additional dollars in their pocket. But one that looks good in the short term, I'll just mention it, is that they've liberalized your ability to draw down against your retirement funds and borrow up to $100,000 under certain circumstances. But that is necessary today to enable people to get through. But that can have a dramatic societal impact down the road when so many people are pulling their money out and borrowing against it during, say, their 30s, 40s, 50s, in their earlier years, when all that money would be building up tax-free. This could have ramifications for the next generation in terms of what that impact could be. Some of these tax changes are that, I'm not talking about an extension of filing a return from April to July. I'm talking about radical changes in provisions in the code that are being put into place, which will help us in the short term. But again, looking down into the future may have some real ramifications for us down the road.
So Gene has a question. This is important because it's happening all the time. My bank is no longer accepting PPO applications. They referred me to a third party who does not guarantee the outcome of the application. Should I still make application?
I would, but maybe do some due diligence about who that third-party bank is to see, maybe find out what their luck is in turning it around. And to the extent, possibly moving accounts there or establishing an account there, a loan account, a credit card. What we're hearing is the customer of the lender, known to the lender, is obviously going to be, I believe, is going to be somewhat favored because the bank knows them and it makes the whole process easier. But that particular person, I'm dealing with this question, that question over and over again. The banks are saying either we can't take it, you're not fitting our criteria, go to another party. But I would only recommend that you do due diligence, that you're with a good bank or a good lender in that situation.
Well, we're coming up against the end, but this is the question. The New Jersey legislature looking at ways to reduce taxes to give businesses tax relief. Is
Yes.
this going to be the thing that finally gives us a property tax reduction?
I want to say that the answer is yes, and that has to be considered in light of the problems that people are having with taxes, property taxes in New Jersey. Because when you hear all this discussion about all these different types of relief under federal and state tax rules, we're not hearing anything yet really about property taxes.
Right. So again, it's so we have about 2 minutes. One of the things that I've really been pushing for is to have public agencies, because I sit on a school board, I'm on the New Brunswick board, and public agencies, are multi-million-dollar school boards and municipalities spending money with New Jersey certified businesses, whether they're veteran certified businesses or women or minority, or I'm saying even have a family business certification. Glenn, you want to say anything about that?
I think that's a wonderful idea. I totally agree, because we deal with all these different types of certified businesses. And I believe there is a reason to expand those types of services, certifications, beyond the ones that we have now. And that would be a tremendous boost to the economy. Just think about a family business certification,
Yep.
hitting that criteria and enabling you to have all these different favorable tax treatments or loans, what that would do for the New Jersey economy with the role that New Jersey family businesses play.
Excellent. Well, I think, Linda, any final word?
Yes, I was checking out those numbers while you guys were talking. And the FFCR, that's the 80 hours that I talked about, and the 2/3 pay for people who take care of their children, the paid. It applies to small businesses with fewer than 500 employees. And it was anticipated that regulations would come out, and the regulations are not finalized yet, to exempt businesses with fewer than 50 employees. So
Excellent.
we can expect that will probably happen, but it only applies to companies that have less than 500 employees.
Well, I think, Jennifer, Karen, I think we're at time. We have a lot more questions. We could go on for some more time, but Glenn and Linda, I want to thank you very much for bringing your knowledge. And folks, I brought 2 lawyers that said that litigation is not the answer. So I picked the right 2 lawyers. That doesn't happen too often, especially in New Jersey. So thank you very much. Jennifer, anything else?
Hi, Dr. Caldwell. Well, first off, I just want to say thank you on behalf of everybody. Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Glenn, for your presentation tonight. The knowledge and the insight was absolutely incredible. And I think you guys really shared a lot to help people best understand the small business stimulus and how the CARE Act can help them and benefit them. I do want to share on your behalf, because I know I saw it quite a few times in the chat. If anybody has any questions for Dr. Caldwell that get answered tonight, check the chat, but the email is Rothman, that's ROTHMAN @fdu.edu. So if you didn't get a question in tonight and you wanted to email him, I'm sure he agrees to email him. I do want to thank everybody for attending tonight's webinar with Dr. Caldwell, Linda, and Glenn. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up email. We will be sending an evaluation so we can get your feedback on tonight's event. As Karen mentioned earlier, we do have various other webinars coming up. So you can get that information at support.fdu.edu. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again to our presenters tonight. You guys were phenomenal. And everyone, please stay safe, stay healthy, and wash your hands. Have a good night.
Thank you for having
Night.
us.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.